Wow, it's happening. Ravi, glass of water, please. I'm ready.
LifeBridge presents KC Life Talks, Life and Leadership Lessons.
My journey began when I was born in the year 1967 to a beautiful fourth generation Pentecostal family in the southern state of Kerala, popularly known as God's own country. God has blessed me to have been raised in this home. And obviously, my mom and dad, at their early days of their life, hoped and prayed that they will have a normal family that would be just like any other home. But situations and circumstances changed even as my mom realized that she is actually married to a man who was mentally abnormal from the age of 15, where he picked up schizophrenic disease when he was studying in high school. Later on, his dad and his family members thought that getting him married would help him to ease his tension, and perhaps that will make him to behave normal. And that's why the marriage was arranged. My mother had little choice as to whom she can marry or not marry, as the arranged marriage system demanded that the girl agrees to the father's and the family's choice. Many of mom's siblings was not in favor of this marriage, knowing that there was some kind of a mental abnormality with my father. But my grandfather, being a Pentecostal preacher, believed that my dad would be healed and that he will become a normal man. As I was born, my dad was again feeling very emotionally up and down, and the circumstances in our home really turned very ugly as my dad tried to punish my mother, abuse my mother physically, verbally, and there was an emotional torture that followed immediately after I was born. As I was born, the circumstances in our family became very abnormal as my dad became sick again. And as I was growing up, the battle continued on from time to time when my dad will lose his temper and he will physically abuse my mother. And so from very childhood, I have seen and I have witnessed such traumatic encounter where my dad was abusing my mother. I have witnessed repeatedly my dad grabbing the hair of my mother and banging her head against the wall. She suffered and endured much abuse under the hands of my father. But my mother, being a godly woman, endured the torture, hoping that somehow that she can raise the son and she can manage to live on. My grandfather continued to work hard and toil hard to provide for the family, knowing that his son had physical limitations to care for the family and to provide for the family. As I grew older, my dad began to turn his anger towards me as well. He would vent his anger against me and he would chase me out of the house. And I remember running away from the house just to protect myself in fear. And I would seek help to stay overnight in my neighbor's house sometimes, in my relatives' home sometimes, where I was given a place to stay, and I was so happy to have a place where I can sleep at night peacefully. As I grow older, as I would stay in these homes with my relatives and family, friends, some of the younger ones who are much older than me have began to sexually abuse me. And so now running to these homes for refuge became a traumatizing experience for fear of being abused. Here is my father chasing me out, and I'm fearful of my very life. And I'm running away for a refuge in a place where I can find protection, where I was sexually abused. This has traumatized me as a boy growing up. As a young boy, I was longing and desiring the embrace of my father. And yet, I was so far away from ever receiving such a love from my father. And all I could witness in these moments of traumatizing experience, when my dad loses his temper and he becomes violent and he starts destroying our home, he starts destroying our crops in the farm, or he start physically abusing my mother, all I have witnessed often is neighbors and healthy men who would come and tie my dad's legs and arms and put him on a jeep and take him to the mental hospital. That have really traumatized me as a small son, watching my father go through that. I did not understand all that was happening in his mind or in his body, only to realize later in my life, as my grandfather shared with me, that there is no one in our entire family, in the genealogy of our history, that have ever had this mental disease. This was one of a rare case, as I found out later in life that my dad was very highly intellectual in his academic pursuit as a sportsman. He was a handsome looking young man, very sharp with high IQ. And something that triggered in his classroom in the high school where he lost his emotion, that became the tipping point of his emotional outburst. And so this traumatizing experience continued. And there was one night, I still remember my grandfather telling me, "James, do not sleep tonight because I expect your dad to lose his temper tonight." And so myself and my grandfather was awake, sitting in our bed, anticipating for anything to go wrong that night. Suddenly, almost midnight, about 12 o'clock at night, I hear a big scream in my mother's bedroom. And me and my grandfather, we rushed to the door, and my grandfather kicked open the door. And all we found was my dad on top of my mother with his hands over the neck of my mother. And my mother was screaming for her life. And my grandfather, with all his strength, pushed him out. And we asked Dad, I cried out and asked Dad, "Dad, what are you doing to my mom?" And I cried. And somehow my dad backed off. And then suddenly, with the noise in the house, neighbors came, and my younger brother was sent to call my dad's older brother, and they all came. And my mother had to quickly run away from the house with me embraced in her arms. We actually had to go and hide in the bush, in the jungle where there are snakes. And we were staying there overnight. In the meantime, my grandfather and the neighbors have taken my dad to the mental hospital. Early morning, as my dad was taken to the hospital, we returned home, and I was checking my mom's bedroom, and I found under the pillow a butcher's knife hidden under the pillow. And I asked my mom, "Mom, have you seen this? Did you keep this here?" So she said, "No, I did not keep this knife here." Only to realize that the night before, my dad had planned in his mind to kill my mother. Looking back, I can see how God perhaps shut his mind to even remember that he had kept a knife. Had it been for the knife that he used, my mother would not be alive today. God sovereignly protected my mother. I began to cry out and ask God, "God, why are you doing this in my life? Why is this happening in my life? Where do I go? Who do I have? What do I do with my life?" And all these questions began to come flashback in my mind. My mother continued to encourage me. And in the meantime, my grandmother was a wonderful woman of prayer. And always I find her in the bedroom, in the midst of all the drama and the upheaval that is happening in the house. My grandmother on her knees, praying and crying out to God for a miracle, for a breakthrough in our family. The doctors in those days, in the 1970s, were unable to diagnose the situation and give a proper medication. And so my grandfather resorted for spiritual avenues. He invited the best gifted men of healing in the state of Kerala. And they had fasting prayers in our house where we would shut down the entire kitchen for 30 days, 41 days. And as the entire family, we will sit in prayer, praying for God to heal my father. And there was no answer to these prayers. Months and years of ongoing prayers amounted to nothing. As my dad would chase me to kill me many times, I had to run away from my house. Now where do I go? I cannot go to my relative's home because I'm fearful of being sexually abused. And sometimes this chase happens in the middle of the night, 10 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night. And I still remember having to run to our local cemetery and even hiding in the cemetery. And I have heard all kinds of traumatizing stories about ghosts coming out of these graves. And I lived in the fear, staying even in the cemetery. And there are times in cobra-fested bushes to just save my life overnight. And I look back and I see how God, in the midst of all such painful situations where I was on the brink of being killed, my mother would have been killed, I see there is a glimpse of hope amidst all the darkness that there is. There is a bright ray of hope that I could hold on to, that there is, at the end of the day, that there is a God, perhaps, who is still in control. While I could not naturally sense that, while I was still having the questions in my heart about God, where are you? God would show himself through in these small glimpses of light in the midst of such darkness. If you are listening to me today and perhaps you are going through such experience in your life right now, where you feel like you have a father who hates you, you feel like you have been abused and exploited by others, where you begin to hate yourself, and where you don't feel like you are loved by anybody and you don't have any friends, let me tell you, in your helplessness, in your loneliness, in your alone times, never give up hope. Hold on to the very little thing that God helps you to hold on to, that hope, and you will realize that in due course of time, God is going to birth something wonderful, something beautiful. So will you hold on to that hope today? Will you give God a chance to see you through the season in your life that only God knows what He is doing in and through your life? And I lived through that pain of not knowing what this is all about, only to know that God had a purpose at the end of it all. And I was tasked with the job of throwing red hot chili pepper. What I saw was blood coming out of my brother's head. Being a young boy, what do I know to kill a man?
Don't miss the story and experience. Subscribe LifeBridge and stay tuned.